Welcome back to another episode of ACR Convergence on Air, the official podcast of the American College of Rheumatology. I am your host, Dr. John Hausman. We continue our coverage of ACR Convergence 2023, where we bring you episodes packed with groundbreaking science, brilliant ideas, and influential voices from this year's Convergence annual meeting. We are once again recording live at the San Diego Convention Center, covering some of the most important talks of Convergence 2023. The discussion for today's episode was a session entitled Recruiting, Retaining, and Sustaining the Rheumatology Workforce, which was moderated by Dr. Dan Badafarano. The session examined the current challenges for maintaining a healthy and thriving rheumatology workforce. The panelists came from a variety of backgrounds in both private practice and academia, and they all experienced firsthand some of the challenges that were predicted by the 2015 workforce study, including the increased demand for rheumatology care, as well as the decreased supply of rheumatologists. In this episode, we'll discuss how our guests have implemented various strategies to keep up with the increased demand at the same time that they try to decrease the administrative burden to physicians. This includes using advanced practice providers, involving pharmacists in providing care to patients, using artificial intelligence in help drafting the clinic notes, and opening up new fellowship programs in areas of the country that are currently underserved. The panelists for the session and guests for our episode are Dr. David Bulbin, Dr. Chris Phillips, and Dr. Marcus Snow. I'll let them introduce themselves at the beginning of the episode. Enjoy. Dave, Chris, Marcus, welcome to the show.
It's good to be here.
Thank you.
So, Dave, let's start with you first. Tell me a little bit about where you're at now.
So I am the fellowship program director for Geisinger Medical Center in Danville, Pennsylvania. I did my medical school at the West Virginia School of Osteopathic Medicine, and I did all my training in internal medicine fellowship at Geisinger, and I've been there ever since 2011, and an attending physician since 2016. I run our ultrasound program. I'm involved in a lot of different things research-wise, but population health and disease activity measures and metrics are my favorite thing. And you know, one of the things we recognize in what we do is we need more people in what we do, being in a rural area, having a large hospital in a rural area. And the goal is to increase the workforce by opening a new fellowship at one of our satellite sites, which is
fantastic.
the goal and part of the reason I'm here.
Fantastic. Chris.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Chris Phillips. So I'm in full-time private practice in Paducah, Kentucky, which is about as far west as you can go in a rural state. I trained at WashU and came to Paducah in 2010 out of fellowship and have been there ever since. So it's me and two extenders that I work with, and we've got a large referral base and have seen a lot of a reduction in rheumatology services around us since we've been there. So
Wow.
Very underserved area.
Okay. Marcus.
Yeah, so I originally started out, did all my training in Omaha. So I'm Marcus Snow from Omaha, University of Nebraska Medical Center. And so when I started out in training after I graduated from fellowship, I was in a private practice for 5.5 years. And as practices can have happened to them, it kind of broke apart, and I ended back up at the university. And so in Omaha, when I was first in practice, we had a 2-week wait, and it was you know the sweet spot if you ever have it. You know, you have a little bit of time to make sure all your slots are filled, but you see patients quickly. And if you look at Dan Badafarano has an amazing graph that shows what the numbers were like in 2015, what they were projected to be in 2025, and essentially in our region, in the north central region, I think it was basically half the rheumatologists would be available per 100,000. And I can tell you that this was a prediction that has absolutely come true to us. Our wait time now is 6 months. I mean, when I first started, I actually did a satellite clinic mainly just to make sure that I went 80 miles west, just to kind of balance things out and better serve our state. It's reached a point now that 6-month wait. We're trying like heck to get people seen. So that's kind of where we're coming from. And I'm in clinic 4 days a week, but I am at a major medical center. And so it's a little different situation than Chris, but at the same time, it's very similar to what everybody's experiencing.
Interesting. And it's great to have the three of you here because you each have a little bit of a different perspective on the workforce. So earlier today, you guys gave a presentation. It was moderated by Dan Barafrano, who we've had in our podcast before, talk about the workforce in episode 52 for anybody that's interested. Can one of you summarize what are some of the key issues that he presented during today's session?
Sure. So I think a few of the things that we went over with the group were, like Marcus was alluding to, the drop overall over time of rheumatologists in the area, both adult and pediatric. Pediatric being a completely different monster, already low on people as it is,
Right.
and continuing to get lower as time goes on. People having to travel across multiple states just to get care for their kid who has a very rare, unusual disease. We talked a little bit about ways to improve the recruitment, ways to think about how we should be talking to rheumatologists to get them to come to the areas where they're needed, things to increase the workforce, whether it be through fellows or whether it be through advanced practitioners, which Chris has done a very marvelous job of doing in his practice to improve his quality of care he can provide for his community, and needing, creative ideas to change the way that we get people to do what we all love to do every day of our lives.
And how we deal with burnout, which is a huge issue as a result of the shortage and the continual, onslaught of patients, right? I mean, there's just such a huge issue with how we deal with just being overloaded, older but younger rheumatologists as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think burnout was a big topic today. I also think afterwards, especially, we had a lot of conversations about ways that potentially we could increase access with, basically not spreading ourselves so thin. And so I had conversations about, who has used scribes and are there ways to do, more innovative things like e-consults and some other ways to try to triage patients and also try to get the number of patients waiting to see us down so that we can better serve those who are waiting.
And to that point, I didn't mention this to you guys earlier, but I'm on the rheumatology steering board for EPIC. And one of the big things at this meeting is artificial intelligence and the uses of artificial intelligence. And the EHRs are starting to develop ways to record what we say, so it automatically puts it into the, EHR, and we don't actually have to type it out. Even more advanced than just as simple as dictating. So there's a lot, giving you an automatic answer for an in-basket message that you can choose to use or not. So there's some other creative ideas that are coming down the pike.
That's great. Yeah, I remember when Dan came on the show, he spoke about how there's projected to be increased demand for rheumatology care with the aging of the population. And at the same time, the number of rheumatologists are going down, partly because many people, as you guys have mentioned before we started the show, don't want to work full time, right? They want quality of life. They want to do 4 clinics or 3 clinics. They want to work part time. And so there's this, great gap between the need for rheumatologists and the availability of rheumatologists. And he also mentioned how the rheumatologists aren't spread out evenly throughout the country, right? So in Boston, you can throw a stone and hit a rheumatologist over the head, but in many of the places where you guys are at, the rheumatologists are far and few between.
I think the data says that most of us settle within an hour or two of where we train, some 80+% of us. And obviously the fellowship programs are not geographically apportioned evenly throughout our country. So that's one of the issues they're looking at.
Yeah. And Marcus, you mentioned that already in the few years you've been in practice, you've seen a change with decrease in the number of rheumatologists available. Chris and David, have you guys seen any other similar changes over the last few years?
I certainly have. I've been in Paducah for 13 years, and within the catchment area of where patients will come to me from, there have basically been 7 FTEs that have left either due to retirement, health issues, relocation, and there's been about 1.5 FTEs that have replaced them.
Wow.
So my catchment area has grown to 2 to 3 hour drives, for people, and I've had to figure out ways to, try to accommodate as many of those patients as possible.
Wow.
In the Geisinger system, rheumatology has been one of the most stable forces throughout the history of our program, which has been around since the mid 1970s.
Wow.
And we rarely have lost a provider over time beyond they retire. In the last year, we've lost 4 providers in our Western group, which is in State College, Pennsylvania, next to Penn State. We have 1 provider right now. They went down from 5 providers in 2014 to 1 provider and 1 new advanced practitioner who's learning on the fly. And he is moving faster than the speed of light every day of his life. And his persona is changing, and you can see it.
Wow.
It's not his fault. He's working harder than a person can work.
I think it's interesting that we mentioned this because looking back as I was preparing for our talk, I was part of our second fellowship class at the University of Nebraska, and that was in 2007. And so prior to that, any rheumatologist that came to Nebraska trained elsewhere, obviously, and we don't have a lot of fellowship training programs that are close by. And so, but right now, our faculty is, at the university, we have 14 members of faculty, and the last 8 people we have added, 7 have been trained in our institution.
Wow. Okay.
And
so it makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference, I think. And then also on top of that, we've trained rheumatologists now. One of our fellows is going to Wyoming, and we're actually another of our previous fellows is in Wyoming. So we're hoping, the regional benefit of having a training program, I think, can't be understated. I mean, I don't think it can be overstated how important that is.
Dave, what do you know about that?
I mean, we have the same situation. I mean, everybody who's been in our practice over time, 95-ish% have been Geisinger born and bred. Started there for internal medicine, did fellowship, and stayed on as faculty, and stayed for 25, 30 years. I think of our group and core faculty currently in our fellowship, only 1 person is not a Geisinger person out of the 8 people that we have. And there's like a nationalistic view of Geisinger. I'm sure Nebraska's the same way. You fall in love with the place and you stay. And to Chris's point, most of the people who work at Geisinger have some affiliation with Geisinger, whether they train there, went away, come back, or if they train there and stay for the breadth of their career. And it's becoming more difficult to do that because the climate is making people not want to stay.
Yeah, so it sounds like at least part of the solution may be to develop training programs in these places that don't have enough rheumatologists and sort of build it from scratch rather than asking people to move there. That might be more difficult. So aside from, increasing having new fellowship programs in the areas that are needed or increasing the number of fellows, how else are you guys thinking about meeting the needs of patients with rheumatic diseases, with the current shortage?
Yeah, I'll start with that one. I mean, I think in private practice, my approach has been to employ advanced practice providers, which we'll all have some feedback on how that's best been utilized. That's one approach, and the other approach is there a way to bend the curve of the patients that are being referred to us, right, to reduce inappropriate referrals, and that's a whole nother beast. I don't know what the answer is to that, but I was overwhelmed with patients 6 or 7 years into practice and had been uneasy about the notion of adding a physician extender, and finally just decided to do that. And I knew that recruiting a rheumatologist to my area was going to be a difficult proposition. And I've had a great experience. I brought on 1, and then a few years later, a second. And there's a lot of models for how to train them. I mean, I think most of us who use them, they've shadowed us, they've learned from us. We've sent them to ACR or ARP courses. And it's a continual learning process, and it's a comfort level with, you know, the idea of whether your patients are going to be comfortable seeing someone who's not you,
Hmm.
and how do you manage that, right? And so different of us do that differently. I try to alternate visits. I've gotten one of my extenders to the point that she's seeing some of the uncomplicated new patients for me,
Okay.
and that's allowed me to focus a little bit more on the more acute ones. Um, and it's been a reasonably good model for us, that is still being refined. You know, I'd like to be at the point where I'm seeing the complex things and they're seeing the simple things, and
Yeah.
that's really hard to manage with the schedule because you just don't know that ahead of time very well.
Right.
But how you keep them happy is also huge. And if you only have them see your fibromyalgia patients, that could be a ticket for them, you know, looking for a job with ortho
Yeah.
or
Although I
some
think
other.
sometimes those are the most complex patients that we
It's
care
true.
for.
It's true. It's true. But you need to look for a way to compensate them fairly,
Mm.
incentivize them through whatever means makes sense to you, and really keep them happy so they don't jump ship. Yeah.
Yeah, I think our experience at the University of Nebraska is in its infancy. Our organization actually purchased a practice in town that has advanced practice providers, and they've been functioning fairly independent through the years. And now, as we are more in, as the university is more involved, I think as rheumatologists, we're trying to figure out the best way to do this.
Hmm.
uh, if I have a 6 month wait, I have a 3 to 4 month wait for return patients now.
Wow.
And so that's the biggest. The 6 month wait is a big deal, and everyone talks about that. And we know that, but I can't. I mean, I really struggle unless I start booking patients earlier in the day, over my noon hour, after clinic, like to get people back for even 4 week follow ups. Like you have a vasculitis patient, you want to see them relatively quickly. So we're trying to find ways to integrate our advanced practice providers and truly make them extenders. And we're learning. It's a work in progress. We have some great folks that are working for us, and we just need to find the right way. And so I've talked to folks across the ACR. I've talked to Chris. I've talked to other folks just to kind of see what their experience has been. So try to learn from those who have been where I am. And but I think it'll be successful. It's just something that we have to work on.
Yeah, at Geisinger, we've had nurse specialists in place since 2005.
Hmm.
Nurse specialist was the other side of the coin when the advanced practice concept was coming into play. And the thing about a nurse specialist is they never went forward to being NPs. So they
Hmm.
have to have full supervision all the way through. They can write, they're basically an advanced scribe.
Yeah.
They learn all the skills of what they're doing, but they need us to be there. So it doesn't save time per se. We've been very fortunate to get our first NP in the past year and a half. She came from Vanderbilt University. Her name is Celia Prince. I got to plug her. She's amazing. And she was PMR before coming to us. So she had a musculoskeletal background.
Oh,
So it wasn't a
super.
huge transition for her. And since she's been there, she's picked up things relatively quickly, but she's very, very much a physician extender and will tell you that. And I think a systematic issue is that there's this push to make physician extenders into full providers and take them to the level where they're doing everything without as much supervision and probably more autonomy than they're looking for,
Hmm.
which creates a lot of complexity, especially when they're not comfortable with the patient they're seeing. Which, to Chris's point, he's trying to do things to make sure that they stay comfortable with what they do. And Celia's done a great job of advocating for herself to allow us to do that. She sees osteoporosis, simple RA, fibromyalgia a little bit, simple OA, and she's building herself in her skill set. But she wants to see the interesting things to keep it, fresh, make it more interesting, stay happy in what she does. And I think we need to tailor to our NPs to allow them to do that. We're very lucky to have her, and probably going to need more as time goes
Yeah.
on for sure.
So is she seeing patients, new patients, or
She is.
She is new
She
patients.
is. She sees new osteoporosis patients.
Okay.
And she doesn't really need me, honestly.
Amazing.
But I'm there always if she does. Dr. Olenjinsky, who is our High Rock, won the Clinical Care Innovation Award a couple days ago for our osteoporosis program, kind of oversees her learning in
Okay.
osteoporosis. And she's passionate about osteoporosis. So, like I said, we're lucky to have her. I think we need more advanced practitioners across the board. It's another way to get patients seen.
Yeah.
I think one thing too that I've had conversations with, there was a rheumatologist who retired out of Lincoln, and he called me and used our state society actually, and he's like, look, we cannot, we have, she is, his nurse practitioner is trained, she's done rheumatology, she loves rheumatology. If we don't get her a job somewhere else, she will be going to ortho or somewhere else, and we will lose all that knowledge that she has gained. So, and until he had said that to me, I had never, I didn't think about that as a huge problem. That's a huge brain drain. That's like a retirement. And so I think that's something that I'd never considered.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the climate in advanced practitioners is very unique. I was talking about this today. I can't just decide I don't like rheumatology anymore, I'm going to go be a pulmonologist tomorrow. You have to go through the fellowship and be ready to go. And it takes time. But advanced practitioners have a great luxury of their apprentice style. They can go where they want to go, learn how to do it, and then stay there. And if they don't like it, move on to the next thing. And so we have that extra little wrinkle that we have to deal with, where it's not just keeping them happy, but keeping them engaged. Because if they lose engagement, they'll go someplace else. And rheumatology is not, the big producer that orthopedics, that cardiothoracic surgery, that vascular surgery is, and they can go there and it's paid commensurate with what you're doing. So they make more money in those settings. And so we have to do something to give them incentive to stay with us, and not just the fact that rheumatology is the best thing ever and everyone should understand that.
Right.
Which is true.
I think those are key points, though. I mean, in conversations I've had with some of our colleagues, even at this meeting, I think that was one of the larger holdups I've heard from several. It's just this idea that we're going to train these apprentices and invest these resources, and then they're going to leave for greener pastures or whatever. So I think it's so critical to really look critically at your incentive package, your compensation package. Make sure that they know that you're there for them if there's uncertainty, and it's the patients as well, that the patients know that, this extender you're seeing is an extension of me. I've trained them. And if they don't know what to do, I'm in the next room and I'm immediately available. And I think that can be comforting to the patient and the extender.
I totally agree. And then to add to the insult to the injury of it all, it's creating animosity that doesn't need to be there. There is definitely a sort of tense situation with how physicians feel about advanced practitioners in practice, and the things that the world is doing to give them more autonomy, and people losing jobs and other people gaining jobs. And it makes it even harder to try to recruit, because they want to be in a place where they're comfortable. And there are programs out there that physicians sort of are against advanced practice concept. And if those physicians work with you, keeping that person there is even more difficult, because they're going to come in and they're going to make snarky comments that might offend the person. So you have to create a climate that makes them comfortable within the concept of what we're doing, which also it just adds another thing to think about. And I think Chris probably has dealt with that, I would imagine.
It's a great point. Let's shift gears a little bit and talk about different practice styles. So, in thinking about as a fellow, I remember, considering the various different types of opportunities out there for careers. Marcus, can you talk a little bit about some of the differences and similarities between private practice and academic medicine, since you've been in both worlds?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I entered private practice to a small group of internists and rheumatologists, very small overall. And at its core, there's very little difference between private practice and academics, because most of your time is spent either taking care of the patient in the room, or if you're a researcher, you're spending time thinking about how you can improve patient care. But at its core, there's very little difference. I think that the subtleties and the things that maybe smack you in the face a little bit is when you're in private practice, you're responsible for the building, you're responsible for the staff. And so, you're running a business, and some people that they love it. And some people, can't get away fast enough. And obviously we're seeing a trend towards much more employed positions these days, for lots of different reasons. When you go to academics or a big center, if, for example, when I first got into my office, my new office 8 years ago, they had patched the wall, and it just sat there with the spackle on the wall, and I was like, this needs to be fixed. It wasn't a huge deal, right? But at the same time, every day you walked in and the spackle's on the wall,
Right.
and I said, what's going on here? And they're like, we put in a ticket for it. And so, like, at the anniversary of my hiring, 1 year later, like, some guy came by without just walked into my office and started painting it. So, like, but that was like an example to me. Like, at a big institution, like, you lose control of that, and obviously there can be politics involved when you get a bunch of people and a bunch of doctors, and in a group, there's going to be politics involved. In private practice, you don't have that. But in private practice, to some degree, you don't also have that team aspect, and so you're kind of lone wolf. Like, I mean, Chris is out there and he's spending for himself and running his business. So I think that there are benefits of both. I think that the team aspect of being part of a bigger organization I liked a lot. I still like a lot, because you think you can make bigger changes, with the whole organization behind you. But also the flexibility. If you want to take the carpet out, you take the carpet out tomorrow in private practice, whereas you can't do that at the bigger institution.
Chris, what do you think? You're nodding there. What are some of the perks of having your own practice?
Oh, I agree with everything Marcus just said. And I would be remiss not to plug private practice rheumatology as the best solution. So everyone should do that. I'm just partly kidding. But seriously, we are, I think maybe a third of rheumatologists are in private practice, give or take. And I think that as far as volume of patients seen, we're going to be the most productive group just by the nature of the beast. And so from a workforce perspective, it's going to be counterproductive if everyone gets employed. There's just frankly more incentive to generate more patient visits when it's more directly affecting your bottom line. So I love private practice. I love the autonomy of being my own boss. The model many of us work under is, we would call it eat what you kill, right? We take home what we generate minus our overhead. And that's not for everybody. I mean, that means that when Medicare says there's a 3.5% cut this year,
Right.
I can predict that that's going to directly impact my bottom line. And maybe I'm insulated from that if I'm working for RVUs at an institution, right? If I want to take a week of vacation, I can take 10 weeks of vacation if I want to, but it's just, what do you want to be paid for that?
Yep.
So that's totally for some people, and it's not for others. And many of us are entrepreneurial in private practice, and we enjoy doing that, but it's risk reward, right? I mean, so we are able to generate revenue, but we also are kind of directly in the firing line if things go in a negative way from an economic perspective.
Good point.
Yeah.
Dave, how do you see it from an academic center?
So I would say the same things to echo Marcus's points. I'm in clinic 80%. I get 20% for academic purposes, and I went from being 100% to 80% when I took over the fellowship.
Wow.
But I didn't decrease my census from 100% to 80%. So I have to be creative in finding places to put patients. And one of the biggest issues in the world of what we do right now is exactly what Marcus's point was about timing of returns. There's this big push for news to be seen, because obviously news generate more revenue. But the problem with rheumatology is we don't see a new and then send them back to their PCB typically. It's very rare that happens. And we generate patient relationships more rich than some PCPs generate with their patients. And we end up becoming the PCP in some cases. And so we need those return slots to be able to see our complicated patients. And there are fewer of those over time. And arguing with the powers that be to change that is difficult. And from an academic standpoint, it reduces the academic fervor. People are less interested in doing the things necessary to train our new fellows and the fellows over time, because there's too much pressure to do the other things. And many of the world of what we do is family derived now. I think you have more family people doing rheumatology than previously, in the sense of They're more concerned about getting home to their kids and having their kids available and getting them to soccer games and doing those things, which is to my point about how you need 2 rheumatologists for one, because they're going to be 0.6 so they can be home when their kids get off the bus. And we need to adjust to that.
But don't you think some of that goes back to the amount of paperwork, prior authorizations, like the amount of BS that we have to deal with on a daily basis? Like I remember when I remember when I was a medical student, I rotated actually with the pediatricians group that I went to. So I went back home and I was able to rotate back with my pediatrician, and their notes were handwritten. And I look at it, and it was, like subjective, pain, objective, or no, was no objective, just assessment, otitis media, plan, penicillin, PCN, right? That was a note. And thinking about now how you mentioned, we're looking at Epic's looking at AI to help us generate our notes. So maybe the pendulum is swinging. Let's hope the pendulum's swinging. If you want to be an optimist, I don't know if that's really reality, but like, is the pendulum swinging so that maybe some of this BS will go away? I don't know.
And that's the other side of the coin. The crux of it all is, to your point, funny story. When I was in training in West Virginia in my third year of medical school and clinicals, there was an old private practice PCP who still wore his medical student white coat when he went into the hospital. And he had a patient who was unfortunately ill in the ICU. And the note the day before was hanging by a thread. That's all it was. And then the next day, unfortunately, the woman passed away, and the note was thread broke. And like, you think about like what if we wrote that today, we would get lambasted.
Yeah.
But your point is taken. I spend more time outside of work on my bureaucratic-y, annoying, frustrating, extra stuff than I do on the things I enjoy doing. And that's part of the workforce issue. People see that. And they don't want to do that. So cutting back reduces that. Yeah. And the thing that's really scary about it is cutting back is advantageous when you're in an employed setting, because you have less rigor on meeting the demands of what's required and the people who are at the higher amount. And so there's a lot of battle between and no one's motivated to do the work, as Chris said, because ultimately they meet their demands and they're happy they're meeting their demands. But they pay them less as an overall salary, so they're okay with it. But they won't hire a new person because they're taking up an office. And so it's very tricky to navigate. And so that's something in fellowship that we have to be very careful about. We try not to have our fellows seeing that every day. We try to keep the climate very positive if we're able to, because we don't want them to see that and then not stay. And I think that has been a detriment to keeping people in our system as time has gone on. We have not recruited as many fellows to stay recently because of that juncture.
Yeah, they did a study in my hospital of Epic in-basket messages, and rheumatology had twice as many messages as the next specialty. So, our specialty is so complex, right? And so many labs are ordered and imaging studies that you have to follow up, and patients need, monitoring labs every so often, and they need to come back to clinic, and you have to organize their care with other, specialties. So it's complex, and that takes a lot of time and effort, and maybe that's, one of the sources of burnout.
And to that point, so that's part of the reason why we are trying to accomplish the goal of starting a fellowship at one of our satellite sites, because the docs who are there are overwhelmed with the workload. When they're on a consult week, they see patients from 7:30 to 3. Then they have a little bit of time to catch up on in-basket, and then they're going to the hospital to see consults. And there are many days where they don't get out till 9, 10 o'clock at night. If we can implement a fellowship, we're hitting twofold. We are increasing workforce, and we're improving morale and potentially increasing recruitment, because people will want to come because they can train fellows, and academics brings happiness and it brings fulfillment. And so it's got a double-edged bonus if we can do that in that sense, and hopefully prevent other people from leaving because they're getting slammed, for lack of a better way to put it.
From the perspective of how we manage the volume of patient visits that we need to manage, I'm really interested because both of you mentioned the return patients, which we sometimes overlook. And I just wonder, there's not really a set protocol to say an RA patient needs to come every 2 months or every 3 months or every 6 months. And if you poll our members, I think that that's really all over the map. And I'd be really interested, and there may be this data out there, I don't know, but I mean, best practice ways to do remote management with labs, with, e-check-ins, whatever, because really when we talk about a workforce shortage, what we're really trying to do is balance the supply of rheumatology providers to the volume of work that needs done, right?
Yep.
And so you can try to move either end of that needle. And if we think we need to see our RA patients every 2 months forever, then that's moving one end of the needle in the wrong direction.
Your point is well taken. I think that is, like I said, creativity is the key to fixing these problems. We have to be very creative in the ideas that we come up with. And, I think people are spacing out visits more than they would like to. Now, the fatal flaw of that is the patients send an in-basket message. And I mean, this happens to my wife, who's a neurologist. She doesn't have time to see all of her patients. She ends up managing them to some degree through the in-basket, which has a whole lot of logistical complexity to it from a multitude of avenues. And so one of the things that we have done, one of my fellows is presenting this as an oral presentation tomorrow at 3:15 in quality measures, is we have implemented a pharmacy program where our pharmacists help manage our rheumatoid arthritis patients. So instead of that 1 month follow-up coming when you start the methotrexate, they see the pharmacist, and the pharmacist makes sure that their labs are ordered, make sure that they're doing well, and then based on their rapid 3 and CDI, sort of CDI, you can't really do a full CDI, but rapid 3 will escalate the methotrexate on our behalf. And by the time we see them again at month 4, they're fully escalated on methotrexate, they're transitioned to sub-Q if they haven't been transitioned, and I'm ready to make the decision on what to do with the biologic therapy, and I've met all the demands of what the payers require, and it saves time. Now, the caveat to that is I'm not seeing a patient I would have seen, so they replace it with somebody else as a new that now needs the same thing because that's the style and design of what we're doing right now. But in a perfect world, that would allow more room for returns. That would allow more room to see the things that need to be seen. It would allow room for acutes if they need to come in. And so that's one way that we are creatively trying to tackle this process. There's more ways that we could probably come up with over time, I would imagine.
I'm trying to be a little bit better about breaking up with patients. And it's something that so when I started in practice, like I mentioned, we had a 2-week wait. So we still see pretty much everything that walks through the door, and we haven't had a real significant screening process, and we're working on that a little bit. But I've had patients I've seen for 10 years for their OA. Well, all I'm doing is refilling anti-inflammatories. Like I'm like, maybe your primary wants to. Do you want to cut back on your visits and just see your primary? And a surprising amount are like, no, I'm good. And so I love seeing them. That they're kind of like family a little bit, like kind of like distant relatives. I'm seeing, I'm seeing them for so long, but at the same time, it's tough to do. And I don't think I do that very well to say I don't need to see you. And I'm trying to be more, trying to get better at that.
Yeah, no, I have the same problem to the T. And that's the advanced practice model where it comes in and it can make such a difference, because if we can say, look, you're doing wonderfully, I'm happy with where you're at, I'm going to transition you to my advanced practitioner. She's wonderful, or he's wonderful. And I will check in on you on occasion. They'll send you to me if something comes up or something changes, but they should be able to cover you for the time being. Even if I go in the room and say hi for 5 seconds, at least I've reduced that burden a little bit, and it allows it to go forward. I agree with you about the friends thing with the patients. I mean, I'm curious, how many times has a patient walked in and they change over from calling you Dr. Snow or Dr. Phillips to Chris or Marcus? I have that happen all the time, and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know if I'm supposed to say nope, it's Dr. Bulbin, or I usually just let it go because it's not a ton of people, but we really build relationships with our patients. And being in rural areas, you see your patients everywhere. Like you become the mayor of the town by accident, and it's really neat because they'll come up to you. I remember walking into a Walmart with my kid after a baseball game at 8 o'clock at night, and one of my very wonderful patients who's now dealing with leukemia, unfortunately, who has AS, he was going to have a cardiac catheterization. Wow. And I walked by the aisle, and he's 6'6", so you can't miss him. And I waved and said hi because we made eye contact. He followed me into the next aisle, and I talked him off the ledge at 8:30 at night for his cardiac cath the next day, because that's what we do. Yeah. We build tremendous relationships with our patients. One of the reasons we go into rheumatology, and we can't just stop doing that because the demands of the job force it. So we gotta, again, creative ways to maintain. APs allow for that.
I think we've all had that experience, and most of those patients that might not necessarily need us that acutely, in my clinic, they still would like to come every year or two, so they're in the system, quote unquote, in case something happens. But I've had decent luck using my extenders to help. I hate to use the word screen, but I mean, we in the private world, we usually take most of the referrals that people send us. That's kind of what we do to keep our referral base
right
and good relationships. So we're not in the business of turning a lot of referrals down, maybe a few, but there's a number of them that we'll see once and just say, this is not something you need us for. Here's what the diagnosis is, or maybe we see them 2 times to make sure they're settled. And some of those may see my PA that one time, and they may never see me if she's able to, determine that their low titer ANA is not clinically significant. So we've had pretty good luck with that model.
And in private practice, they can run with that really, really well. But in our world, patients are getting a lot more power in scheduling themselves and doing things themselves. And so if they've been seen once, they can be seen whenever they want to be seen. And if we have someone who's in the boat of what Chris just described, they can come back in 9 months if they feel like it. And there's not a whole lot I can do to prevent that, which takes up a slot and prevent someone from being seen who needs to be seen per se, because the PCP could have easily taken over the care. And it's another thing that drives us to burnout. And I bring up burnout because we haven't talked about it yet, and I know we wanted to talk about it. But burnout is created by situations like that.
Yeah, I wonder, you brought the point, if burnout was an issue that you guys addressed, or if, those were some of the questions that some of the people had at your discussion.
Yeah, I mean, burnout was a huge topic, and we talked a lot about it from an academic perspective. In the session this morning, we didn't talk about it quite as much from a private clinic perspective. I mean, I think no matter what scenario you're in, there are battles you're going to face, and they're just different battles. And, in the private clinic, it's more, prior authorization, step therapy, looking at your financial bottom line. And then a huge one is charting. Do you use a scribe? Do you take 2 hours at night to finish your notes? How do you do that? And I haven't met very many of us who have figured that out in a good way. But I think, from a private perspective, figuring out a way to not be charting and doing callbacks at all hours would be what most of us are looking for. And hopefully, I've heard some rumblings about some AI-driven things that, maybe if they come to fruition, will help us with our notes. But I feel like that remains to be fully worked out.
Whether it's going to be great or not remains to be seen, but they're definitely coming. I mean, for me, I reached a point in my career. A couple years into my career, I was reading bone density test at 11 o'clock after I got my kids to sleep, just to be able to keep up with our group read 7,000 bone density tests in 2019. Wow. Dr. Olenjinsky read 4,000 of them.
Wow.
Me and Dr. Donayo read 2,500 and 1,500. It's incredible numbers. And I would be up at 11 o'clock reading DEXAs when I was on call for the DEXAs for that week. And I just reached a point where I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to not do work after I get home that isn't something I'm interested in doing. And that probably has kept me from getting to that point, because I probably would be burned out if I still read DEXAs at 11 o'clock.
Yeah, it's tough. I have young kids, and that's, I think, the kids go to bed, then I had nights where I was doing charts for a couple hours. I've tried to just set like times, like I just tell myself, okay, Monday night I'm going to work on stuff, and then Tuesday I'm not. And I try to set limits, which has been helpful. I think for me, personally, like if you talk about, how do you reduce burnout, I will tell you volunteering with the ACR, shameless plug here, but I will tell you it has helped me deal with burnout a little bit. I've been serving on the committee on rheumatologic care, and actually feeling like you can fight back on the prior authorizations, the step therapy, the feeling you can do those things, and have the push from the ACR, the AMA to help push back on some of the ridiculousness that we deal with, I think has been somewhat, just made any kind of burnout maybe sting less, or make the kind of frustration sting less. I don't know if
it reduces your learned helplessness sensation.
Yeah, absolutely.
It really does. I would totally agree with that.
I love that. That's wonderful. That's amazing way to put it. I think for us, I'm meeting Chris and Marcus for the first times for real. They obviously knew each other before, but in the little bit of time I've spent with them, you can tell there's passion for what we do. And you have, honestly, it's like a bar, and I always have to keep my passion on the other side of it, because if I don't, I'm not going to survive. I'm so passionate about everything I do every day. The new rheumatoid arthritis is the same as it was day one in fellowship for me. We're building amazing things at what we do. We're providing amazing things to what we do. He's making huge steps in advocacy for APPs. He's making tremendous steps in understanding the value of a rheumatologist. And we're making this world better for what we do. And I think everyone in rheumatology has this feel, and we can't let that die. Like, I think one of the biggest things we have to do is we have to continue to support each other as a field, to realize that this is the greatest thing you can possibly do in your life. When I was a kid, I would have said playing baseball in the major leagues would be the case. I argue that rheumatology was my, call up to the major leagues. I love every minute of what I do every day, and it makes it easier to deal with the nonsense.
Gentlemen, this has been an awesome conversation. I really appreciate your time and efforts and everything that you do for your patients, for your fellows, and certainly for the American College of Rheumatology. Thank you so much for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of Convergence.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
us. It was great.
Absolutely.
Well, there you have it. A brilliant discussion of the challenges that we are all facing, while at the same time offering some suggestions to improve daily practice and patient access to care. Don't forget to tune in to ACR Convergence on Air every morning for a rendezvous with innovation, inspiration, and invaluable insights. Thank you all for listening, downloading, subscribing to our show, and for rating us with 5 stars, or however many stars you think we deserve. Until next time, let's work with each other to support a healthy and thriving rheumatology workforce. And of course, stay healthy.